All right, let's go ahead and let's call the meeting to order. Mr. City Clerk, do roll call, please.
Commissioner Aliman, Commissioner Stover,
Here.
Commissioner Wagstaff,
Here.
Vice Chair Nindell,
Present.
Chair Voss.
Present. Commissioner Wagstaff, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Okay, we have approval of the agenda. Is there any, if there's no comments on that, we will seek a motion for approval of the agenda. Commissioners?
I move we approve the agenda of the meeting.
Okay, need a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Mr. City Clerk, are we doing roll call or are we doing push
Voice
vote?
call.
Okay.
Commissioner Stover,
Yes.
Commissioner Wagstaff,
Yes.
Vice Chair Nindell,
Yes.
Chair Voss.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right. Next item is meeting minutes, approval of the meeting minutes for the meeting of April 11th. If there are no questions or comments in regards to that, we'll need a motion for that.
I move we approve the meetings of the last minute.
Okay, perfect. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, we got a motion and a second. Mr. City Clerk?
Commissioner Stover,
Yes.
Commissioner Wagstaff,
Yes.
Vice Chair Nindell,
Yes.
Chair Voss.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right. Next item, public comments. Mr. City Clerk, do we have any public comments?
Not at this time, sir.
All righty. Then we will move on to public hearing. Recommendation to the City Council to amend various chapters of Title 17. Mr. Community Development Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. This is the first batch of many chapters for Title 17 that will be coming before you for amendments over the next few months. A little bit of background about this effort. The city received a grant from the California Department of Housing and Community Development to assist in streamlining the processing and approval of housing projects through our code changes, code amendments, specifically focusing on affordable housing, but housing in general. Over the last few years, the state has passed several laws that require zoning code to be updated, specifically approval of housing projects that must be based on objective standards where housing is allowed by right. So although we're taking the first 6 chapters this evening, we'll be coming back and looking at more chapters, specifically those that get into detail with respect to housing developments. So while we were doing so, staff wanted to accomplish other goals in this refresh. One is to clarify the language in the chapters that's ambiguous or contradictory, perform an internal consistency check across all chapters of the zoning code, and perform a consistency check with the general plan, including the housing element, which was recently adopted. So we took these first 7 chapters to review. These are the smaller chapters to sort of get started with. In looking at chapter 17.124, nonconforming structures, we felt like it needed some more work, especially to be compliant with some of the state regulations for housing. So we're postponing that one. But I'll run through each one, and I guess, Mr. Chairman, we'd like to pause at each one and take comment for each chapter.
Yes, it's probably more easier to do that in case there's individual questions on each one, easier for staff.
Okay.
Respond to that.
The first chapter has to do with administrative use permits. These are relatively simple changes, changing the name of from administrative conditional use permits to administrative use permits, where they are identified as administrative use permits throughout the code. Again, this is one of those consistency changes. Better define the time frame for an AU approval to a maximum of 5 years. That would include an initial approval for 2 years and 3 years of additional approvals in 1-year increments as requested by the applicant. It's in our code now, but it's in different sections, and so we're pulling it all together so you can see approvals and renewals or extensions all in one section. This is kind of a common sense thing, but we added the requirement that an AUP should not be granted if the underlying properties have a code violation or notice to abate, unless the AUP is remedying those code violations. In many of these chapters, we simplified the repetitive language in the findings. And then a kind of a new portion that was added is the requirement that the AUP becomes null and void if not operational in 5 years. So this elicited some discussion internally with staff, and we brought up lots of potential cases about, well, what if, and we arrived at this potential solution to the issue, and that is in instances where the applicant has made substantial progress in meeting the requirements of the AUP defined as 90% of the project cost, the director may grant an additional extension to complete the project. Such an extension shall not be more than 1 year. So this gets into the hypothetical of where, say, somebody has constructed their main structure, let's say it's cannabis cultivation or maybe even a drive-through restaurant, and minor things remain like construction of the trash enclosure or something, or maybe a final coat of blacktop. Then this clause would basically allow me to extend 1 more year. So that's kind of the highlight of that chapter.
Okay. Commissioners, are there any questions on that one? All right. We will move on to the next item.
Okay. The next item is 17.76, conditional use permits. Now, these are the ones that are coming to you for approval. AUPs are administrative staff, ministerial type approvals. So here it's basically repeating similar language that we had for AUPs, specifying the maximum approval of 5 years. The same with remedying code violations, simplifying the language in the findings, and again, adding the requirement that CUP becomes null and void if not operational in 5 years, with the same caveat that we added to AUPs.
Okay. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
Is there any substantive change to either of the last 2 pieces of code? Or just in language and organization and the 5-year limit?
Oh, there's no substantive change to that. It's just organization and spelling it out more clearly.
Right. Okay, thank you. That's what I thought.
I'm curious, how many CUPs right now are at risk of becoming null and void?
Yeah, it would not be retroactive. So these changes would apply to projects going forward.
Okay.
So we do have a handful of cannabis cultivation projects which were approved under CUP, and some of them have gone beyond their 5 years. But the way we would write the ordinance is from adoption going forward, so it would not be retroactive.
Okay. Any others? Let's mosey on over to design review.
Okay. Really minor word changes here.
Right.
Spelling out things like planning commission instead of commission and language like that.
Sure. Understood. Okay, if there's nothing more on that, then we'll go on to development permits.
Okay. So development permits, very similar to CUPs. These would come before you. Again, starting out, same language as specifying a maximum 5-year approval. Same language as remedying code violations. Again, attempting to simplify the language in the findings. Added the requirement that the DP becomes null and void if not operational 5 years. So AUPs, CUPs, and DPs would all have that same similar language. The 2 substantive changes here are defining what is considered minor. The code just says minor, and that's really subjective and open to interpretation. So to be a little bit more clear and spell out the authority for approval, we've defined that as a minor addition to commercial, industrial, or mixed use to be 20% of the square footage of the existing structure or structures or less.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay?
And I like that. I remember when we originally had these CUPs, we were doing 10% on those, and it just wasn't quite enough for some of the maneuvering that some of the larger cultivation facilities needed to get manufacturing. And it was literally like 12 and 13% or something like that, and then they'd have to come back. This allows a little bit to adjust to the various economic times and the business culture of it, so.
Right. And it's a little bit more pertinent to the size of the structure to begin with. So there's a big difference between, say, a 3,000 square foot drive-through and a 700,000 square foot warehouse distribution facility. So it gives us that kind of flexibility there.
All right.
Just to clarify, so this would also apply to residential, or is it just commercial and industrial?
Just commercial, industrial, mixed use. Residential is typically done with a track map, for parcels. So it would be, in this case, just applying to commercial, industrial, mixed use.
Question.
Yes, sir.
How did you come up with 21 units or more?
Okay, so
per
the next one is the threshold for planning commission review of multifamily housing. So right now, our code pretty much states 5 units or more would go to the planning commission. Anything under is a staff level ministerial review. As I mentioned, the state is looking for all the communities to streamline the process for housing approval, which means removing barriers to approval. So we looked at what would potentially be a good number, and different cities have done this different ways. Some have exempted all multifamily housing from a PC approval, or some have exempting anything that involves affordable housing to a PC approval. A lot of that is kind of driven by, I believe it's SB 35, which sets very hard dates on review of projects. If it's not reviewed and approved, then it's automatically deemed approved at the end of those periods. But to answer your question, how we came up with the number of 20 units per acre, if you look at a residential multifamily district, that is the maximum of 20 units per acre. So this would essentially involve a single acre project of 20 units as kind of the threshold. The other thing we looked at was the residential high density. In that zoning code, we have a minimum of 20 units and up to a maximum of 30. That excludes any kind of density bonus that you would get for developing affordable housing. So 20 made sense given our current code minimums and maximums.
Yes, ma'am.
Just to clarify, would a 20-unit development on several acres also qualify as a multifamily development under this code?
It would, 20 units or less.
Mm-hmm. So it's by the units only?
Right.
And is that specifically to comply with the housing element,
Yes.
more or less?
Yes, the programs and the housing elements would spell out how we're going to be streamlining the process.
Okay.
And this is just multifamily. Obviously, if it's a subdivision, Trax map will come to you.
Okay. Any other questions on this topic? No? All right. Hearings and appeals.
Again, very minor wording changes, specifying commission to be planning commission and minor grammar type of changes.
Okay. Any questions on this? Seeing none. All right. The next one was going to be postponed, so then temporary use permit.
Yep, I'm sorry. This is temporary use permits, again, similar minor wording changes. Couple of things we did add is the ability for the director to impose ADA requirements for access for certain TUPs. There's a whole list of requirements that can be imposed, not shall be imposed, but can be imposed depending on the project. So this discussion actually originated with the food trucks and food truck parks that we're now looking at, and While the city is allowing food trucks and food truck parks, we still have to apply ADA requirements to those parks. So that was one addition, and then something that we've been doing at the staff level just codifies it, but specifying the use of containers and pods for temporary storage for somebody moving into a house or moving out of a house. I believe we also added a specified construction trailer as well as TUPs. So those were the major changes there.
All right.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering, with the specified use of the containers, is that going to affect in any way the use of containers for some of our commercial things like we have on Pearson, where they want to use the containers to do shops or something like that?
No, it would not. Those would be considered permanent and not fall under a temporary use permit. For example, one of the food truck parks that we're looking at, they would come in for a development permit and go through PC approval as part of that. The other thing is, containers that are, say, used for cooking or restaurants or seating areas, they have certain building code requirements that they have to meet that not necessarily a storage container would.
Okay. If we have any item, I think under Chair and Planning Commission member reports, or if we have any item that may fall in some of these others that we want to bring up, do you want us to bring it up now, or shall we bring it up under Chair and Planning Commissioner reports?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if it is specifically, it doesn't have to just be the changes. So let's say if there's a commissioner who wants to talk about something that is not necessarily related to the changes, but it's in the actual ordinance, you could bring it up now if there's
Okay.
questions, and then we
Okay.
could take public comment and public
Perfect.
testimony, and then bring it back, and so it's in the record.
Perfect. We'll go ahead and do that, because I know there were going to be a couple of those type of questions. Absolutely. So, we will start with Commissioner Nandel. Did you have any extra or any items that you wanted to talk about? No. Okay. Commissioner Stover?
Absolutely.
All right.
First of all, I want to thank staff so much for all of your hard work on this. I think you guys did a great job cleaning up the document, and it looks really good. We already talked about some of those that's and furthers and things like that, but we don't need to waste our time with that right now. But one thing on this last piece of code about the temporary use permit that I was not pleased with is Section B, outdoor displays and sales of merchandise within commercial land use districts are limited to 2 events per calendar year, not exceeding 4 consecutive days each, including only merchandise customarily sold on the premise by a permanently established business. And I think that piece of code, I think that's detrimental to our business partners. And I'd like to see it changed or eliminated. I don't know that it's necessarily a part of a temporary use permit, although my understanding is to eliminate it might require a larger process. So in the spirit of streamlining the process, I kind of wrote out a little.
So right now, our reg is 4 days a year is what it is? Or what's allowed?
Yeah,
for?
it's, you can have an outdoor sale, 2 events per calendar year, not exceeding 4 consecutive days. So that's 8 days per year.
Okay.
And I just know anecdotally, I know of a merchant who had a lowrider bicycle shop around the corner and ended up leaving town because of this exact piece of legislation. He wanted to display his bikes out on the sidewalk, and because he wasn't allowed to do so, he ended up moving his business to Rancho. And I think that kind of business would be perfect for our area. And I think that in this economic climate, we need to do whatever we can to help support our business people to be successful. The very business people that we're hoping to invite to our city would be prematurely or preemptively taxed by this use permit or with a fine. And so I don't think that that's fair. I think that we need to change that and be friendly to our businesses.
So let me ask Steph, if a business wants to put items outside, outdoor display, in addition to the TUP, are they required to get a land use permit? Or is kind of the ingredients of that, if it's in the right of way or anything like that?
It's just a TUP.
Okay.
And then one thing we would do is check to make sure there's adequate path of travel on the sidewalk
Okay,
for ADA access as part of it.
Okay,
So
okay.
I believe the minimum is 36 inches.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some of our sidewalks are 4 feet or 5 feet.
Okay.
And we want to make sure there weren't any obstructions.
So, I mean, in light of the, and I appreciate you bringing this up, because, I mean, in light of Stagecoach, Coachella, Easter, spring break, Thanksgiving, Veterans Day, Christmas time, these kinds of
Retail.
things. You know, there's a lot of those where they want to bring that stuff out, and most of our shops here are mom and pop shops.
Yeah.
So was there a recommendation that you had?
Well, yes.
Okay.
I researched some of the other cities around, and I came up with something that I felt was covered our bases, so that we don't have to go to a further process, but it will also protect the business people. And what I wrote here was, let's see. Commercial outdoor sales and display of goods are permitted as a part of an otherwise lawful commercial use, provided that activities do not impede ingress and egress and leave sidewalks that are passable with 3 feet to accommodate pedestrians and ADA and be ADA compliant. And then I added such events are exempt from payment of a TUP application fee.
So what's the number of days, or does there,
I didn't put number of
no,
days,
they're
but we
just,
could.
they could just come in and just,
I had an idea for number of days.
so what you read is just on any given time if they want a temporary use permit because it's a new owner, grand reopener, or a special, celebration of some sort, Christmas thing, then they just get that, and it's not,
Yeah.
so there's no,
I didn't put a time limit, but I did also write a second part with a time limit if that's something that people are concerned about. Would you
okay.
like to hear that?
Yeah, just so, staff can kind of hear
Okay.
that, then they can kind of give some feedback on that
Sure.
part.
So for people who want to put some restriction on our business people as to how many sales they can have per year on the sidewalk, I also looked at other cities around, and the one that I found that seemed to be lenient and good, limited to 4 periods of 10 days plus 4 separate weekend events. Each event must be separated by 2 weeks. And then that way there's, 2 weeks of nothing.
What
And
was
then
the
they
10
can-
days, was that total 10 days?
4 periods of 10 days. So in reality, they could have 12 weekends. So that's 1/4 of the weekends that
So
they could have a
Up to
sale.
36 days? Or something like that, right?
Yeah, it's 4 periods of 10 days, so that's
Is it,
40 days, and 4 separate weekends, so that's 48 days total.
That's if there's even type of restriction. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's more
Right.
lenient. If you want
Okay.
to be,
Staff, what are your experience and comments? I know what my thoughts are on this, but I'd like to hear everybody else's.
One concern I would have would be for a merchant that would leave the merchandise out, every day and all night. And I use the case of an appliance store that I'm familiar with that would actually roll the appliances out in front of the business. The sidewalk was clear and wide enough, but you just had all the appliances, lined up in front of the businesses, and they just stayed there,
Right.
all the time. I think the alternative that you were suggesting of 4 periods of 10 days, that's a little bit more in line with our garage sale permits, which we allow 4 times a year, and kind of puts it on par with what the residential could do.
And just to address your concern about things staying overnight, could we not just add a sentence that says the sidewalk shall be clear of all, merchandise by the end of business day or something?
Or all merchandise brought inside
Yeah.
the premises. It's an alternative, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thoughts? Okay. Thoughts? So my thoughts are this. Obviously, we require the items to be to pull in, and instead of like counting days and all these things, I would just say that the permit's good for 3 days. When 3 days are up, they're done, and that's it, with no limit.
No limit of the number you can have?
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
good.
I don't see, I mean, it's kind of subjective and, us kind of, trying to, are you number 7? Is it number 8? Is it number whatever? Instead, just, you go in, you pay for your temporary use permit, you show staff on a map how it's going to be drawn out. This is what I'm going to put out here, or this is how it's going to be. It's not in the right of way, all this great stuff. Yes, I signed here that I'm going to bring all my items in at the end of the day, which is whatever hour that is. And so they do it. I mean, it's, they get to kind of pick, every business is going to have their own, dozen or so different holidays and stuff that they do this thing. And it's, I think trying to put how many days total is going to be a logistic nightmare for staff.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. This way, it's just, you're a business, these are the criterias, there's certain right-of-way criterias.
Yeah.
So they have to, meet all right-of-way requirements, which shouldn't be, it's too much of a headache for that. And the city's basically allowing our mom and pop stores and some of the others to do, put your stuff out. On Cinco de Mayo, a lot of our Mexican restaurants or different things might want to have, or stores or carnicerias or whatever, might want to have special things out there, and let's do it for the weekend. I like the 3-day cap because if you start doing more than that, then what's going to happen is other people are going to get a habit of putting things out and not realizing it's a temporary use permit. Instead, it's an ongoing thing. Or like community development director stated, they may decide, well, I'm getting tired of taking this stuff in and out after 5 days, so they're going to just leave it out there. This is clean. It gets you through a weekend. It gets you through a holiday weekend. Staff signs off on it. They're done with it. Whoever does the compliance inspection on it goes out there and says, okay, your 3 days is done, we're over. Is anybody?
3 days. I have a question for staff. How much does this temporary use permit cost for a merchant?
$175 for a temporary use permit. $175.
$175.
Jesus,
Yeah, but
that's a lot of money.
right,
And I would say that fees are set by city council.
right.
So if I may ask the city attorney, if we were to suggest to city council to remove that application fee, would that be something that city council could do?
City council sets fees by resolution pursuant to a nexus study. The answer is yes. Theoretically, city council could do it. It's technically outside of the purview of the planning commission. Kind of fees are not within the planning commission's purview. With that said, if that is something that planning commission would like city council to look at, I'm sure that staff could, tell them that, hey, we understand it's outside of the purview, but city council could definitely look at the fees. But all of our fees are backed up by a nexus study. And so obviously we recoup the costs of the city fees for the TUP.
Well, there is staff involvement from a compliance perspective, making sure
Absolutely.
they're doing that and the filing and application with it.
Absolutely.
I think they're two separate things. I understand, I appreciate your comments on it, but it's, for staff, they're in there, they're doing the job, they're having them fill it out, they're actually going onto the site. They have to go visit the site to make sure that things aren't blocking, although we trust all of our business people, but sometimes they get a little overly excited and they put something in the right of way or blocking something. And if a city staff person gives them permission with that, so they have to take pictures of the area and stuff, there is some time there. So that's, basically that's 2 hours of employee time that's spent processing it all. I think that, if we want to give just a recommendation to review these fees, we can, but I'd hate to kind of bog up a motion, a change in the policy on this thing just over a fee.
Well, I think that fee, having owned my own business previously, I think that fee is exorbitant. If you're going to go out and put dollar T-shirts on a rack outside because you have too many T-shirts, that's 175 widgets that you have to sell just to make your permit fee. And so I think for small businesses that are struggling right now, I would hope if any city council members are listening right now that they would consider reducing that fee for our merchants. I think it's way too high.
Okay. Are there any other comments on this? I think we had a couple suggestions. Suggestion I had was amend the TUP section where it requires items to be pulled out, put back in at the close of day, so they can't be stored. Each TUP is a 72-hour period.
Also, Mr. Chair, I also have any kind of right-of-way compliance, such as ADA, that kind of
Yes,
thing, right away,
correct.
and also line of sight.
Right, line of sight.
I added line of sight, so I don't know if you want it in your
No, that's
motion.
true, because
Okay.
if they're in a corner area or depending on traffic and what have you, you don't want to, that's why we have that in the zoning ordinance for houses that are on corners. We have corner cutoffs, so it makes absolute sense. So it's line of sight, right away, ADA, okay. Are there any comments on that?
Mr. Chairman, am I hearing kind of a consensus around that suggestion?
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so we could do that. Let's go on to and what we'll do is we'll put these changes will be in the overall approval of the agenda item itself. So if there's any other items that we want to bring up and do right now, it's time to do it. Did you have others?
No, I think that's it.
That's it. So the one item that I wanted to bring up that is not on this list for today, but it is in the code here somewhere. It's been a long-running item related to the right-of-way passages behind single-family residents. And for a long time, we had homes built where they've had that right-of-way that's between the homes. And here's a fence, and then there's this passageway that's about 10 feet. And a lot of cities, is there a name on there?
Russ.
Oh, okay. So is there, for instance, Palm Springs was one where they were having such a problem with that right-of-way because people were passing through there. They were getting burglaries, people jumping and stuff, throwing stuff into the backyards, these kinds of things, climbing over, doing this, or the debris and stuff was just, going, or they had an old mattress, they'd throw it back there. And it just was never getting cleaned up or taken care of with that. So you drive around town and all you have to do is look between those houses with the right-of-way line, and you'll never see a clear passageway through it. It's always high brush,
Piles of junk.
junk, everything you can possibly manage. Yet the property is owned by the individual property owners, but we've had the fences put in the way they are because utility companies needed to have access. Well, I lived my entire youth with a utility pole in the backyard, and they opened the gate, they went back there and did their thing. So I think they can do the same. What I'd like to see somewhere in one of these sections, I'm not sure which would be the appropriate one, is if we'd come back and somehow open up an area, have the ability where the residents could move their fence to where their property line is, with the caveat that they can't put a structure there. They can landscape it, they can put a tree, they can, they can't put their house there or something like that, but it has to be accessible for the utility company to have access to it. And that was the intent of that, is the original intent.
They never use it.
And they don't. They can't get a truck, they can't get anything, so they have to go through the yard to get there anyways. And yet here's this section of land that's just like no man's land, filled with 10-foot high brush and, criminal running through there and people stealing stuff, throwing stuff, dumping stuff, dead stuff, rodents. It's just, and it's been an ongoing thing, and our town's had it, and I think that it's time, especially now that we're doing utilities underground in a lot of areas, and we're requiring that, it's time to kind of really address this issue and just give people that extra part of the yard so they've got it, and you can access it like any other normal piece of property. They come into my yard, they open the gate, there's the utility pole, they do their thing. Time Warner doesn't have to go crawling through whatever, this kind of thing. So that's a recommendation that I would have, that we would add as a change in one of these that allows a property owner, if they want to, that they can go, they can put a fence, on their property line there, clean it up. The only caveat is, you can't build a house on it, obviously, because it's in the right of way, but it's a regular part of their use, of their property.
Mr. Chair, if I may, what I'm hearing, it seems like that, I know exactly the scenario that you're talking about, but what we have before you is obviously our six chapters to the code changes. I'm thinking, and I would actually defer to the director as well, but I'm thinking what I'm hearing is that that change would most probably be in like a general development standards for residential, or possibly all residential, including anywhere from your single family all the way up to possibly multifamily. I don't know how multifamily, because I know exactly the scenario where you have that area in the back.
Right.
And again, the director could correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if it would go specifically within these 6 chapters. I think it might have to come back in a possibly a development standard for general residential districts, but that's kind of how I'm thinking of it, just off the top of my head without actually looking through the code. That said, I definitely note the inquiry.
Yeah.
I just don't know if it's anywhere that we could change it in these.
I don't think it's in one of these. I think it's in
Chapters.
1708, but I'll let.
I would say it's 1708 as well. But again, I defer to the director if I'm missing
Yeah,
something.
it would definitely be in general residential standards, and it's something we frankly going to need to research. It's like, what type of easement is it? For example, if it's an easement for overhead utility lines, then that does need to remain clear, and even planting a tree under the utility lines is.
I mean, we can put whatever standard is, but the reality of it is now, I can drive all over town and I can show you tons and tons and tons of those things that I wouldn't even want to walk through because of syringes, drugs, mattresses, everything you can possibly think of, homeless hangouts, where people break into a house and run. So, I mean, I think what we would do is we would allow a property owner to, if you so choose, you can get a permit, you can extend your fence to your property line, and these are the standards required because it is a right-of-way issue to keep it clear, but you have control of that property now, and so you can keep it clean and all that kind of thing. I mean, we know what issue it is. It's kind of been, it's like it's been the elephant in the room, but nobody's ever wanted to talk about it, type of thing. And so now I've decided to smack the elephant in the room and say, let's talk about it. I mean, because I don't know another city here in the valley that has this. I remember I was working for the city of Palm Springs when we decided to make this change, and there was an unbelievable amount of people that were thankful that went out, got the permit, put in the fence, they made it nice landscaped, and we didn't have those burglary right-of-ways going through there. I'm sure the police department would appreciate it too. So that's just my 2 cents worth. Does any commissioner have a comment on that? No? You guys okay with it? Sure. Okay, so we'll just bring that back on, and whatever right-of-way condition requirement, that's needed to be there. I think the whole purpose is getting rid of those. It's time. Okay.
I have a question. Are we supposed to make the motion on the?
Nope. Not yet. We're still in the.
We're still.
This was the entertaining questions and stuff. Now, are there any other items of commissioners? Okay, seeing none, then now we'll go ahead and we'll open the public hearing. And we will take public testimony from any in favor, opposed, or neutral. And I have a speaker request form from some guy named Russell Betts.
A chance to speak. I've been listening at home. So on the item regarding the temporary use permits, I was listening to the discussion. That's going to come to the council eventually. And I wasn't quite clear on where the direction was going from the commission. On one hand, I'm hearing debate up here about opening things up for our businesses and maybe making it more friendly. Like, for example, a bike shop could take their bikes out every day and then take them back in. A guy who sells washer and dryers and refrigerators, wheel those out, set them by the curb, put them back in. A secondhand store could take some of their items, put them out on the curb and take them back in, which is all what businesses like to do. And that's more in kin with what you see the very active business environment down in, if you go take a drive down Palm Springs. On the other hand, I'm seeing a suggestion that somebody who's probably not real familiar with the process to come down to City Hall, go down and pay a $175 fee, and very restricted on when they can put stuff out on the street, and basically will probably just say, well, too much trouble, I'm not going to do it. So I'm just trying to see what the commission's, I would like to have some clear direction from the commission, not just, I'm with a very specific motion that tells the council, hi, are we very business friendly and we want to do everything to encourage these retailers? And is it really necessary for them to come in with drawn out plans, pay fees, go through all the application process? Or can we just handle it as a minor enforcement issue if somebody should possibly get out of hand? I know we've had lots of merchants in town who have just given up and said, you know what, if I can't let somebody see that I have business, that I'm open for business with a few items on the curb with perfectly good access to the RDA, to the sidewalk for ADA reasons, then, you know what, I'm just going to leave. And I've seen 3 or 4 of those businesses make that decision. So I just want to see a general, I would really request that the commission come back with a determination, are we going to be more business friendly, or are we going to be restrictive and keep our foot on these businesses so that they have a hard time getting past. And understanding this isn't a public hearing, and I'm in no way expressing an opinion here.
Right.
I'm just asking for some direction from the commission, and I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if I may respond, what the commission, and Councilmember Betts, I don't know if you heard this or not, or maybe you were in or out, but what I heard from the commission in terms of something for consideration, of course, after the close of the public hearing, you will make the final determination. But from what I heard is that the permit shall be good for 3 days. There are no limits to the permit in terms of number of the permits per year. So long as there is proper right-of-way compliance, ADA compliance, that the business brings in the merchandise at the end of the close of business, and that there is a clear line of sight for pedestrians and vehicles.
That was correct. So, well, no, we're in the public testimony, and then we would close the public hearing, and then we have planning commission discussion. There's one more, okay? I'll explain. Okay, we have a card for Al Rogowski? Rogowski, okay.
I agree with sorry, your name? Russell. I agree with what Russell was saying, and I agree with what Mary Kate was saying. I think to expect these business owners who, a lot of them, I know Patty, the florist down on Palm, she works 2 jobs to keep her flower shop open. So she doesn't have time to come down to City Hall and apply for these permits, and she definitely doesn't have $175 laying around to put towards a permit. And is that $175 for 3 days, or is that for like the year?
We'd have to check with
Because to require that for, I mean, that's a lot for 3 days. some of these businesses may not even make that much money in 3 days, you know? So it's a lot. And like, you're talking about streamlining this process and being able to bring in, you know, focus on the things that really matter. And I think even like, yeah, even sending people out regularly to like take pictures if they're violating, absolutely call somebody in. Like if you're driving past and you see it, or somebody reports the stuff is in the way. But like, I don't know that $175 or like, what is that, $85 an hour we're paying a staff member to be out there walking up and down the street. I don't know. And I think it also like turns an unfair magnifying glass on the businesses as well. Like I have to follow all these rules just to show people that I'm open, because sometimes you can't tell when you walk past these businesses. They're, you know, they can't put anything out. So you're just like kind of looking in the window to see if they're open. So I agree with kind of what everything's saying. I think it's just adding more logistics to people who don't need it. And if we're trying to bring business in, open it up, make it easy. It's already hard enough for them.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, great, thank you. Ted Meyerhofer.
I think that what the city needs to realize is, or be reminded of, that the landlords are charging the same square footage as they are across the freeway in a lot of the cases. We don't have the foot traffic, and it just makes it difficult. The more difficult that we make it for new businesses to come, they're not going to come. I mean, why would I rent a square footage here with no foot traffic and then go over, when I can go over to Palm Springs or wherever where I can get that foot traffic to sell my goods if I was going to go into a business? So we really have to take a look at what we can do to make it more business friendly so that folks will come in. And I agree, $175 is like Chairman Ross, you said that Voss, I'm sorry, Chairman Ross, you said that there's about 2 hours worth of labor in there. So what are we looking at here, $50 an hour? So 175 is pretty high. And that has to go before the council, but we need to make it as friendly as we can. And also on another subject of housing, we're about 100,000 houses behind here in Riverside County from some of the meetings I'm going to. Some of the developers are saying that it's taken them 17 months to get a house built because of the long process that they have to go through with the cities. And it's throughout California they're speaking of. So they're all going over to Nevada, Texas, Arizona to build over there where the process is shorter. So whatever we can do for housing and businesses to make it simpler and easier and more friendly for them to come here, the better off we'll be. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we will go ahead and close the public hearing. Now, Planning Commission discussion. So let me bring this up because a lot of different components here. So I'll make this as a suggestion to you, Director, Community Development Director. So this specific item right here, the outdoor display of things, I understand what they're saying, and I can appreciate that, and I can appreciate what our local business community is. And without naming names of a couple of communities, but I do know of some where they've allowed for all year round that a business can put up to 3 items outside their business as long as it wasn't in the public right of way. And they could do that, and it was all year long with that. And so I personally am not opposed to that. I think that, we got a lot of temporary use permit items that are here, and this is kind of convoluting that. And so we have really 2 different things, outdoor display and temporary use permit. We've now we've broken through the seal here. So now we're talking outdoor display, we're talking temporary use permit. So what I'm thinking is under chapter 1712 probably, which is the June 13th one, would be a good one for outdoor display. And where we have this item where we just allow
And take it out of temporary use permit.
take it out of temporary use permit and instead put it in the commercial district to where, a business is allowed to have up to 3 items in the front of their business as long as it's not in the public right of way. And if all they have is right of way at the corner, right there, then they have to get a special, a permit for that. If it's not, which most of ours is not in the right of way, then they should be okay.
Can I-
I'd like to hear what our development director has to
I
say.
think we should do some more research on this to see what other cities, like when you say 3 items, my response would be define items. Is an item a whole rack of clothes? Is an item, say, three bikes if it's your bike store? So
I would just argue that this is not a temporary use permit issue. This is a sidewalk ingress egress issue. I think we can take this entirely out of the temporary use permitting process and just move it over to public safety. Because really what we're talking about is, can people walk down the sidewalk safely? That's our biggest concern. And the business people, we trust that our business people are not going to put washing machines out and leave them out overnight. But we can also put that in another piece of code that we're also going to be coming up to later. It doesn't have to be in temporary use permits. There's nothing that says that we have to keep this number B in this code.
Correct, that's correct.
Uh,
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, just for clarification,
Right.
and I don't know, this will be up to the Planning Commission. So obviously, the intent is really to move everything forward to the City Council, and so it's how do we
Correct.
do that, right?
Correct.
And so one of the options, there's a few options, but one of the options that the Planning Commission could do is, from what I've heard so far, is, take a vote on everything as is, or we could take it individually. Either one works. And then with the strike-through of subsection B, with the understanding, or at least with the recommendation, I say to City Council to take it out of the temporary use permit section and possibly place it into a different section. Not that it's just going to go away altogether, but that we are going to revisit quickly, this outdoor space, this outdoor merchandise section.
Correct.
That's one that's one option, I should say. The other option is to leave it in with the same kind of caveat to say, hey, we could bring this, back quickly so that we, again, and it's up to the City Council, but bring it back quickly and take it out and just with a magnifying glass and look at that subsection B and where it goes and what other cities do, et cetera. There's kind of two options. You see, one is
Right,
to remove
right.
it.
Yeah. Well, I'm ready to motion if you guys are ready for me.
Yeah, I'm okay keeping it as, I just hate to get it, buried into the temporary use permit thing. I think outdoor display should be a standalone topic, a standalone zoning ordinance item. You look at, and that's typically what you would do for that. And then let's address that as singularly in itself. And that is, what is our goal? Is to allow businesses to put, what's, 3, 4, 5, however, whatever it is that we allow, and have these criterias that are, that it can't be, in the right of way, these kind of things. So, so we have 2 items, actually. We have the right of way, the rear yard fence area thing in the back, that one, and this. So I guess probably the best way would just defer this as a standalone item for the June 13th. The outdoor display part.
So basically, would we approve everything except for that subsection B?
Mm-hmm.
And what would you want to do with the subsection B, moving it to council? Would you want to delete it? Would you want to leave it in? I guess that's really the question. We could leave it as status
Then-
quo, leave
then
it in?
I would strike it.
Delete it.
You'd
I would
strike it?
strike it, yeah.
Delete it.
Yeah,
Do you need a motion?
Yeah,
we will. Let's see.
eventually.
Okay. All right, so, do we have any other items? Okay, I think we're already kind of, okay, so we've already kind of gone through that. So really, consideration of this. So what we need is a motion to approve these changes with the deletion of subsection B of the TUP with the recommendation to come back regarding the right-of-way area, the rear of the properties that we discussed, and the outdoor display thing at the later date.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I definitely hear you with respect to the right-of-way issue. I just don't know if it's actually been agendized. The reason why is because I think that chapter falls under 1708, which was not, I don't think it was
Oh,
agendized
I'm talking the
for-
residential in the back of a.
Yeah, that
Right.
like alleyway issue.
No, I'm talking where you got two single-family homes.
Yes,
And that 10-foot pathway, that for whatever reason we just have always had these people, you can't put a fence there, and it doesn't make sense.
absolutely, but I think the chapter, that would go under 1708, which was not noticed for today's meeting, is what I'm saying. It's a future date. So it's a
Correct.
non-agendized item, so, but I definitely get it that you would want it back for a
Right, so
future
we put
date.
that on there, and then I think the outdoor display, though, was what, 1712?
Yeah,
Okay,
or
so,
17136, or 1712.
Need a motion?
not yet, we're just trying to figure out which one. 17136? Well, no, the outdoor display then would go into the commercial districts, correct? That's correct. It becomes a commercial district item now. It's no longer a TUP item.
Yeah,
We're
it-
striking the letter B,
Correct.
and we're slipping it over to 1712, so then it becomes a separate
1712
standalone
issue.
item under
Correct.
1712, outdoor display.
Correct, and if it is 1712, great. If not, we will go ahead and bring it
Correct,
back, whether or not
correct.
1712 or maybe in a different district.
Yeah, and then the residential one is simply allowing residents to put their fence to where their property line is with the criteria that it has to be open and accessible for, the utility companies to have access to it, but you can fence it off and get a full use of your, 5 feet by 30 feet width of space that you've got back there that's been basically dead land. Okay, do we all got it? All right, then we will now take a motion for that.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the recommendations to City Council amending the various chapters of Title 17 zoning code, including 1774 administrative conditional use permits, Chapter 1776 conditional use permits, again? Oh, administrative conditional use permits, forgive me. Sorry, I'm getting lost.
Or you can just
1780 design review, and 1792 development permits, 17104 hearings and appeals. We're skipping non-conforming structures, and 17136 with the exception of striking Clause B from 17136.020 and moving that item to a later date to remove it from the temporary use permit.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, we get a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Otherwise, we will go ahead and take a roll call vote, Mr. City Clerk.
Commissioner Stover,
Yes.
Commissioner Wagstaff,
Yes.
Vice Chair Nindell,
Yes.
Chair Boss.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay. All right. Moving on, public comments. Are there any other public comments?
Not this time, sir.
All right. Chair and Planning Commission member reports, comments, any? I'm going to bring up something, but anybody else have anything? Okay. So in our general plan, we have a thing in there called the need for a town center, which can be an amphitheater, can be a park, can be a river walk, water features, these kinds of things. And as a commission, we can't say we want them to build, but one of the things we can do, though, because the general plan recommends it, is we can give a recommendation to city council to consider looking into kind of the town center that's in the general plan and, a location of it perhaps. And also what, not at this moment, what items we'd want. But I noticed like the city of Omaha's got a very beautiful river park type thing with an amphitheater, parkland and water features in these things. Tulsa has a really nice one as well. There's bits and pieces of different ones that we have here in the valley. I know Palm Desert's got something, Cathedral City's got a little something, Palm Springs just created something. And yet here we've got some land around here, I'm sure somewhere in the downtownish area that would probably be pretty cool for this thing. And so I'm not sure if we necessarily need to agendize it, but I thought as a commission, let's put the fire to the feet of the council members and say, this is in our general plan. We'd like to have, at least bring it up as a discussion point to kind of start thinking about it now. We got our new city hall and these things coming in and people are talking about what else, what kind of things do we got and, at least get the wheels spinning a little bit.
Good idea.
Thoughts?
So we can't go ahead and discuss it at the moment just because it's something that that would need to be agendized pursuant to the Brown Act. But
Okay.
as I could hear, we could definitely bring it
Okay.
forth for discussion, and maybe just like how we've done something similar in the past is just drafted like a friendly letter from the Planning
Okay.
Commission to the City Council to consider. So this way we have some time and we could all discuss it.
So we'll put that on Chris's birthday,
Oh, is that your birthday?
the 30th. If that's, whatever you guys, I know you guys are busy. Is the 30th good or is it preferably in June?
I think the 30th will work.
Okay.
We'll make it work.
Okay, yeah. It's there, let's use it. All right, Mr. Community Development Director, do you have any comments? Planning staff, any comments?
I have one update for you. We're getting very close to finishing the ADU, pre-approved ADU plan program. I know that's been in the works for a long time. We do finally have stamped plans for our ADUs from the building official. So we're working on developing a plan to roll that out to the public. Several components that we want to include to make it as user-friendly as possible for residents that are exploring the idea of ADUs. So that includes creating a flyer that we can hand out, along with the plans. We'd like to conduct some workshops, at least 2, explaining the process. We want to make sure that people understand while, the city has created these plans, there's still some additional steps, such as creating a site plan, where the ADU would go on your property, and other, things that we had to take into account of. So one of the final steps is the fees for ADUs. So state law, again, requires that if it's under 750 square feet or less, the city is not able to charge impact fees on ADUs. So the question is, what happens for those ADUs that are, greater than that? And state law again says you can charge, but it is at a rate that's a ratio from the size of the ADU to the size of the main house. So we need to go to City Council to get some clarification on those fees. Do they want to charge those fees if it's more than 750 square feet, or some other cities are just waiving them, period, for ADUs? So we need to have that sort of final discussion, then we can wrap that up.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I thought of a question. I don't know if it's too late.
Well, it really kind of depends.
It's an easy one.
Well, maybe kind of, sort of.
Okay. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I can't talk. The Cooler Cities Initiative and the street trees and the grants for street trees and the grants for also families to get trees. Are we participating in that?
Which particular grant are you talking about? Is that a state grant or a federal grant, or?
I'm not completely sure, but I just
Okay.
would love to get us to get on, like, handing out street trees to people's homes. I know there's those programs are going on in Los Angeles and elsewhere, and I'm not sure where the grant funding is coming from, but I'd love to learn and know how to do it.
I know that Edison does have a program that will help cover the cost of street trees. My neighbor actually did it, so I know that's one. But that is from, the resident to Edison. But we have a full-time grant writer now, and that's something we can ask him to follow up on.
I'll tell you who else to look into is the Resource Conservation District, which is a county commission, county district that's appointed. So there's probably 5 or 7 members, and they're appointed by each county supervisor. And the Resource Conservation District engages in a lot of these kind of activities, including the grants. They're actually a federally funded district that is ran through the county. There's a whole bunch of them. And one of those is Arbor Day kind of things, but then they also do the tree stuff, and they also do tamarisk removal and some of these other things. So I don't remember the name of the one that's based here in the valley, but there is one that kind of covers this greater region, and they should probably be able to answer quite a few of those questions on that. Yeah.
I know we have a lot on our plate, but
Because they'll file a grant for the whole valley, and then you don't have to do their stuff. But just a source. All right. Any other comments? See none? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're done.
Yay!